Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to our legal information panel today. Um, we want to welcome CUNY Citizenship Now staff attorney Wilfred Zamora, who's here with us today and who will be talking about the latest updates and on citizenship and how to apply for citizenship and the naturalization process. We have translation for questions available in Hindi, Bengali, and Spanish. Thank you and welcome, Ms. Burden, the Community Relationships Officer for USCIS. We're happy to be here. Thank you for joining us. So, नमस्ते, हमारे साथ विल्फ्रेड ज़मोरा हैं. आपका स्वागत है हमारे लीगल इन्फॉर्मेशन पैनल में आज. तो विल्फ्रेड जो है वो क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के स्टाफ अटर्नी है और वो आज हमारे साथ सिटीजनशिप और सिटीजनशिप के लिए कैसे अप्लाई करना है इसके बारे में बहुत ही पुख्ता और ज़रूरी जानकारी देंगे. और धन्यवाद काउंसिल मेंबर न्यूयॉर्क सिटी काउंसिल मेंबर जेम्स एफ चनारो जो आज ये पैनल स्पॉन्सर किया है उन्होंने. मैं आपको ये भी बता दूं कि साउथ एशियन काउंसिल फॉर सोशल सर्विसेज जो है यहाँ पे हर मंगलवार को दैट इज ट्यूसडे क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के तरफ से एक अटर्नी होते हैं जो फ्री मुफ्त में लीगल एडवाइस देते हैं. इमिग्रेशन के कोई भी सवाल हो हर ट्यूसडे को आपको मदद मिल सकती है उसमें. तो कोई भी आपको इमिग्रेशन से जुड़ा हुआ सवाल हो आप सैक्स को कांटेक्ट कर सकते हैं. और हर मंगलवार को सुबह 10 बजे से शाम के 5:30 बजे तक कोई भी इमिग्रेशन रिलेटेड सवाल जो है वो आप उसकी जानकारी और मदद ले सकते हैं. और मैं अभी विल्फ्रेड का स्वागत करती हूँ. वेलकम विल्फ्रेड.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I hope it's my goal to make this as informative and as instructive as possible for all of you. I'm just going to run through a hopefully a very quick presentation that goes through naturalization. The services that we provide at CUNY Citizenship Now, that services that we provide on behalf of members of the community like yourselves, and also go into just a quick, very, very, very quick rundown of naturalization or citizenship and the application for citizenship. And then my goal is ultimately to leave as much time as possible towards the end for questions and answers that you all surely must have.
तो विल्फ्रेड जो है आज हमको बताएंगे कि आपको किसी को भी जो है अगर सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई करना है तो कैसे करना चाहिए और उसकी प्रक्रिया क्या है. और अंत में 10 मिनट रखेंगे सवाल जवाब के लिए. उनके पास एक पावर पॉइंट प्रेजेंटेशन है जो वो आज हमारे साथ शेयर करेंगे या बांटेंगे. और फिर उसके बाद अगर आपको कोई सवाल है तो आप चैट बॉक्स में उसको टाइप कर सकते हैं या तो फिर आप अपना स्क्रीन के नीचे अगर आप कंप्यूटर यूज कर रहे हैं तो रिएक्शन टैब में आपको हाथ का साइन दिखेगा. आप उसको भी रेज कर सकते हैं और आपको अनम्यूट कर दिया जाएगा और आप अपना सवाल पूछ सकते हैं. Thank you, Wilfred.
Sure. Excellent. So then without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen with you and go through our presentation. Okay. So the idea is that we're going to be talking about naturalization, but for our purposes, we'll just say citizenship. So it's citizenship that we're going to be talking about.
आज naturalization या citizenship के बारे में बात करेंगे.
Okay. And so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about who we are as an organization, CUNY Citizenship Now. CUNY Citizenship Now is the largest university-based immigration law service provider in the nation. In other words, that we are a legal services entity housed within the City University of New York, which is CUNY. As a result of that, we have 6 centers on CUNY campuses. CUNY campuses are all over the 5 boroughs of New York City. And thanks to the generosity of the New York City Council, we also have attorneys that service 40 locations within city council offices. And you might imagine city council members represent the entire city. So we are all over New York City helping community members like yourselves. On average, we hold about 18 to 20 large processing events. What does that mean? What that means is on Saturdays, typically, we will hold what's called mass citizenship events, where people can all come together, usually about 130 people at a time on a given Saturday, and we will help you on that Saturday go from coming in to apply for citizenship, reviewing your documentations and eligibility, filling out the actual forms for you, and ensuring that you leave that event with forms ready to file so you can be on your way to the citizenship process. In this way, we have helped approximately 10 to 12,000 immigrants, all being put on a path to citizenship.
तो थोड़ी सी जानकारी क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के बारे में। तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया, क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ जो है एक कार्यक्रम है जो क्यूनी यानी सिटी यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ न्यूयॉर्क प्रोवाइड करता है। जो जैसे मैंने आपको प्रेजेंटेशन की शुरुआत में बताया था, हर मंगलवार को सैक्स में काउंसिल मेंबर जेम्स एफ जेनारो की तरफ से ये सुविधा उपलब्ध की जाती है। तो वैसे ही क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ जो है और दूसरे न्यूयॉर्क सिटी काउंसिल मेंबर्स के साथ भी काम करता है। तो लगभग 40 जगहों पर ये सेवाएं उपलब्ध कराते हैं और काफी बार ये एक साथ बहुत सारे लोगों को सिटीजनशिप अप्लाई करने में मदद करते हैं। इसका स्पेशल कार्यक्रम आयोजित किया जाता है। साल में कम से कम 18 से 20 ऐसे कार्यक्रम ये आयोजित करते हैं जो काउंसिल मेंबर्स के साथ होता है। और ये शनिवार को होता है, जब सारे लोगों को एक साथ इकट्ठा किया जाता है और आपके पेपर देखते हैं, आपको सिटीजनशिप का जो फॉर्म होता है उसको भरने में मदद करते हैं। हर साल ये कम से कम 10 से 12 हजार लोगों की मदद करते हैं सिटीजनशिप अप्लाई करने में।
So the type of services that we provide services, and they're enumerated here, and I'm just going to give a very brief explanation as to what they are, and I'm happy to entertain questions at the end should you have questions specifically about these. But for example, we would help with what's known as DACA. DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. We will help with TPS applications. We will help with adjustment of status applications. Adjustment of status is just a very broad term that means I would like to apply for a green card, but I would like to apply for my green card here in the United States without having to go back to my country of origin. We will also help with consular processing applications. Consular processing is sort of the opposite of adjustment of status. I want to apply for a green card, but I know that I have to apply in my country of origin at a US embassy or consulate in my country of origin. We will help with naturalization, which is citizenship. We will help with certificates of citizenship. Certificates of citizenship are usually where a parent becomes a citizen, and as a result, their underage child could also, under operation of law, which is just a term to say, think of it as automatically, can also become a citizen. We will help with renewal and replacement of immigrant documents, like if you lose your certificate of citizenship or you have to renew your green card. We will help with family petitions, and we will consult on any area of immigration law. So for example, you might have a case where you might want to apply for asylum. We unfortunately do not handle asylum cases, but we can at least give you all the information necessary so that you're aware of your asylum case, what the likelihood of success with your case, and then we will give you a reformed referral to a partner organization that might be able to take cases that we don't normally take, like asylum.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया कि क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ जो है काफी सारे इमिग्रेशन से जुड़े हुए कामों में मदद कर सकते हैं। डाका, टीपीएस, आपको अपना स्टेटस एडजस्ट करना है या कोई भी किस्म का इमिग्रेशन से जुड़ा हुआ सवाल जवाब हो, वो उसमें आपकी मदद कर सकते हैं। जैसे उन्होंने एक उदाहरण दिया कि अगर किसी को असाइलम के लिए अप्लाई करना है, तो क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ जो है वो असाइलम में मदद नहीं कर सकता आपकी, लेकिन वो आपके असाइलम केस से जुड़े हुए कोई भी सवाल हो उसका जवाब दे सकते हैं। वो आपको बता सकते हैं कि आपके केस में असाइलम मिलना कितना सक्सेसफुल हो सकता है या नहीं हो सकता, उसके बारे में आपको जानकारी दे सकते हैं। और वो कोई बहुत सारे और दूसरी संस्थाएं या ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है जिनके साथ काम करते हैं वो लोग, वो उनके साथ आपको रेफर कर सकते हैं।
Thank you. So most importantly, after we gone through what it is that we do and who we are, all our services, thanks to both the City University of New York and thanks to the City Council of New York City, are absolutely free. We will never charge for any of the work that we do on your behalf. That being said, though, you may be responsible for the fees that USCIS, which is the government, the immigration agency that adjudicates your application, they might have fees. You would be responsible for those fees, but not for any other work that we do. Every time we take on a case, we also analyze to see if you might be eligible for a fee waiver. The government charges a fee. If you're eligible for a fee waiver, we will definitely ask you questions about your eligibility for a fee waiver. And if you're eligible for a fee waiver, we will help you prepare for that fee waiver such that then the application would then be completely free to you. At the end of our work, I always like to say this to people, if we do our job correctly, every step going forward is well illuminated. There are no surprises, and you know how this process is going to play out as you're applying for citizenship or as you're applying for adjustment of status, whatever it is the immigration benefit that you're applying for. At the end of our work, you will receive all the completed applications, all the evidences that go with those applications. In other words, we'll have a quality filing ready to go to USCIS and put together in such a way that hopefully USCIS should be able to quickly review the application and determine, because of how well organized it is and what we included with it, that you see your eligibility for that benefit.
सबसे ज़रूरी बात यह है कि क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ, अभी तक हमने सुना कि वो क्या-क्या सेवाएं उपलब्ध कराते हैं। दूसरी सबसे ज़रूरी चीज़ है, इनके सारी जो सेवाएं वो फ्री हैं या मुफ्त हैं। वो कभी भी, इनके जो भी अटर्नी या लॉयर या वकील जो भी होते हैं, ये कभी आपसे अपने वकालत के लिए कोई पैसा नहीं लेंगे। हाँ, काफ़ी बार यूएससीआईएस, जब हम कोई भी यूएससीआईएस में इमिग्रेशन का पेपर वर्क भरते हैं, तो काफ़ी बार एक वो पेपर के लिए यूएससीआईएस का एक फ़ी होता है, वो फ़ी भरना शायद क्लाइंट को भरना पड़ेगा, लेकिन जो भी अटर्नी फ़ी है या कोई भी और फ़ी है, वो आपको भरने की ज़रूरत नहीं। सारी सेवाएं जो है वो मुफ्त है। वो मुफ्त इसीलिए है क्योंकि हमारे जो सिटी के न्यूयॉर्क शहर के काउंसिल मेंबर है और क्यूनी सिटी यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ न्यूयॉर्क जो है, ये मिलकर इसको इन्होंने फ्री बनाया है। दूसरी चीज़ है, काफ़ी बार जब भी क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के वकील के पास अगर आप जाएंगे, वो आपका केस देखेंगे, वो ज़रूर आपको बताएंगे कि क्या आपके केस में आपको एक कटौती, जो भी पेपर वर्क के लिए पैसा भरना पड़ता है, यूएससीआईएस फी भरना पड़ता है, क्या उसमें आपको कटौती मिल सकती है क्या? ये वो ज़रूर देखेंगे और आपको बताएंगे, और आपके लिए कोई भी अगर कटौती उपलब्ध है तो वो ज़रूर उसमें आपकी मदद करेंगे। आखिरी चीज़ ये है कि इनके वकील जो हैं, ये काफ़ी सालों से ये काम कर रहे हैं, तो इसके लिए जब आप इनके पास जाएँगे कोई भी काम के लिए, तो आपका जो भी पेपर वर्क होगा यूएससीआईएस के लिए, वो एकदम पुख्ता तरीके से किया जाएगा। तो आपको बाद में कोई भी परेशानी नहीं होगी। आपको शायद हो सकता है यूएससीआईएस आपका पेपर देख के बड़ी आसानी से उसको रिव्यू करके आपका काम बहुत ही जल्दी हो सकता है।
Good. Thank you. So then, without further ado, let's get into the benefits of becoming a U.S. citizen. And so one of the first and foremost benefits is you get to vote. You get to vote in the United States in federal and local elections as a U.S. citizen and have a say in terms of the political direction of the United States. That's an obvious benefit that most people recognize right away. But then there's other benefits. Like, for example, as U.S. citizens, typically are no longer removed or deported from the United States. If you're a lawful permanent resident, yes, it's permanent is in the title, but you could, depending on certain actions that you might undertake, could subject yourself to removal from the United States, which is something that would not happen if you were a citizen. You also have the freedom of travel, meaning that as a U.S. citizen, you can return to your country of origin for 5, 6, 10 years even, and then return back to the United States without any issue. You can't do that as a lawful permanent resident. As a lawful permanent resident, the minute you stay outside the United States for longer than 6 months, then you could be accused or asked to justify that you did not intend to abandon your residency. So already you're seeing these differences between citizenship and lawful permanent residence. You don't have to, as a citizen, you no longer have to report to USCIS. What does that mean? Lawful permanent residence. If you move, then you have to update your address to USCIS as to where you moved. Not something that you would have to do if you're a citizen. If you're a citizen, you have eligibility for certain government jobs. There's certain jobs that are only available to citizens of the United States. Not so if those jobs would not be otherwise available to you if you were a lawful permanent resident. And if I may, sorry, as an immigration attorney, everything that I mentioned is absolutely important. Being able to vote, absolutely important. But for those of us that want to also bring the benefits of U.S. citizenship status to our own families, citizens of the United States can petition. Yes, they can petition for their spouses. Yes, they can petition for their underage children, right? Children under 21 and unmarried. But they can also petition for parents, married children, and siblings or brothers and sisters, which is something that lawful permanent residents cannot do. So these are all huge benefits of becoming a citizen of the United States.
Wilfred, I have a very quick question. So we have a question here which says green card and legal permanent resident is it one and the same?
Lawful permanent residents hold green cards. Okay. I always like to say this, because I think it makes sense if you think about it. Lawful permanent residents hold green cards. Green cards are held by lawful permanent residents.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I just want to very quickly provide a translation in Hindi for everything that you just said.
Sure.
तो सिटीजनशिप लेने के फायदे क्या होते हैं? सबसे पहले जैसे आप स्क्रीन में देख रहे हैं, आप वोट दे सकते हैं या मतदान दे सकते हैं। आपकी आवाज जो है आप जरूर और लोगों तक पहुंचा सकते हैं। खास करके बहुत जरूरी होता है, हम लोग सैक्स में हर साल वोटर रजिस्ट्रेशन का ड्राइव करते हैं, तो हम लोग हमेशा बोलते हैं कि जब आप वोट देते हैं तो आपके काउंसिल मेंबर, सिटी काउंसिल सब या असेंबली में सब जगह आपकी आवाज जो है उनको आपकी जरूरतों के बारे में आप बता सकते हैं। दूसरा चीज है, जब आप सिटीजन बनते हैं तो आपके अगर आपको इस कंट्री से डिपोर्टेशन का ऑर्डर या कभी कुछ नहीं मिल सकता। दूसरी चीज है, आप बेफिक्र ट्रैवल कर सकते हैं, आपको यूएस पासपोर्ट मिल सकता है। और अगर आप कभी अगर आप लॉफुल परमानेंट रेजिडेंट या एलपीआर हैं या आपके पास ग्रीन कार्ड है, तो अगर आप यूएस से बाहर गए और काफी सालों तक बाहर रहे तो आपको यूएससीआईएस को रिपोर्ट करना पड़ता है। ये सारी जो भी चीजें हैं, अगर आप सिटीजन बन गए तो आपको ये सब चीजें नहीं करनी पड़ेंगी। दूसरी चीज है कि आप और लोगों को, अपने परिवार के और लोगों को स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं, अपने जैसे माता पिता को स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं। अगर आपके बच्चे हैं, शादीशुदा बच्चे हैं, आप उनको स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं। भाई बहन हैं, उनको स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं। और कुछ नौकरियां जो है, कुछ सरकारी नौकरियां या गवर्नमेंट जॉब जो है वो खाली यूएस सिटीजन्स के लिए होता है, तो आप उन नौकरियों के लिए भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। Thank you.
And was a question about the difference between a green card holder and lawful permanent resident status sufficiently addressed? Do you want me to say more on that?
I think that unless anybody else has, I think that's fine.
Okay, you let me know, and I'm happy to speak more about that. Okay.
Sure.
So then, how do you become a U.S. citizen? What allows you to become a U.S. citizen? So there's a few criteria. One, you must already be a lawful permanent resident, right? Already have a green card, already be a lawful permanent resident. You must be at least 18 years old. Must be at least 18 years old. And you must have continuous residence for either 5 or 3 years. So what does that mean? What that means is from the date that you get your green card, notice this is going to be very important, from the date that you get your green card, you have to wait either 5 or 3 years for you to apply for naturalization. Now, there's going to be a little bit of a caveat to this, or a little bit of a hiccup, but generally speaking, from the date that you get your green card, you take your green card date, you add 5 years, that's the date in which most people can apply for citizenship at the earliest. Okay? Now, there's a special exclusive people that can apply under 3 years as opposed to 5 years. But we're going to get into it a little in the next slide, I believe, and break those out. And then finally, you have to be a person of good moral character. And again, we're going to describe what good moral character is and the type of considerations that USCIS takes into account when determining if somebody has good moral character.
तो सिटीजनशिप के लिए आप कब अप्लाई कर सकते हैं, या आपके पास क्या होना चाहिए कि आप सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई कर सकते हैं या नेचुरलाइजेशन के लिए अप्लाई कर सकते हैं? तो सबसे पहली बात है कि आप लॉफुल परमानेंट रेजिडेंट होने चाहिए, या आपके पास ग्रीन कार्ड होना चाहिए, आपकी उम्र कम से कम 18 साल के ऊपर होनी चाहिए, और तीसरी जो बहुत ही जरूरी चीज है वो ये है कि आपके ग्रीन कार्ड को 5 साल हुआ होना चाहिए। कुछ हालात अब ऐसे भी हैं, कुछ लोगों को जो है 5 साल वेट करने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती, वो 3 साल के बाद भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। वो उसके बारे में आगे और जानेंगे। और सबसे आखिरी चीज जो है कि गुड मॉरल कैरेक्टर, यानी आपका चरित्र जो है वो अच्छा होना चाहिए, उसके बारे में भी आगे जाके विल्फ्रेड और जानकारी देंगे। थैंक यू।
No, of course, thank you. So, as if that wasn't enough, there's more criteria. The other criteria, and I understand that your audience may have questions about this, and I'm ready to answer questions about this in future slides. So the idea is that, yes, generally speaking, you must be able to speak, write, and read basic English. But there's exceptions to that, and we're going to talk about the exceptions. You also have to pass a test on U.S. history and civics, but there's an exception to that, and we're going to talk about the exceptions. And you must be willing to take an oath of allegiance to the United States.
और 3 चीजें हैं जो नेचुरलाइजेशन या सिटीजनशिप के लिए बहुत जरूरी है। सबसे पहली चीज ये है कि आपको बेसिक अंग्रेजी जो है वो लिखना पढ़ना और समझना आना चाहिए। एक हिस्ट्री का या इतिहास और सिविक्स का टेस्ट होता है, वो आपको पास करना पड़ेगा। और तीसरी जो चीज है बहुत जरूरी, कि आपको एक शपथ ग्रहण करनी पड़ेगी कि आप यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका की जो है हमेशा उसका साथ देंगे। तो इनके बारे में अभी विल्फ्रेड आगे और जानकारी देंगे।
Great. So now all those eligibility criteria, we're just going to go into just a little bit of detail just to give some more color to it. So I mentioned the 5-year rule. Think of it as most people who want to apply for citizenship have to be lawful permanent residents for 5 years. So on the date that you get your green card, if you look at your green card, it'll have at the bottom of your green card the date that you first became a lawful permanent resident. You take that date and you add 5 to it, and that's the earliest that you can apply, sort of, because this is immigration and it has to be a little bit of complication. The complication is just this. Think of it as you have a 90-day grace. So if you have a 90-day grace, if I got my green card on April of April of 2015, right? April of 2015. 5 years from April of 2015 would be April of 2020. And that in April of 2020, I can apply for my green card. But USCIS gives you a 90-day grace. 90 days is 3 months. So April 2015 to April 2020, that's a precise 5 years. Subtract 90 days, which is 3 months. April happens to be the 4th month, right? 4 minus 3 equals 1. January of 2020, because of that 90-day grace, now becomes the earliest that I can apply under the 5-year rule. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you
Yeah.
for being very very detailed.
Yeah.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया कि आप कब अप्लाई कर सकते हैं सिटीजनशिप के लिए, तो 5 साल, ज्यादातर जो लोग हैं सबको 5 साल कम से कम वेट करना पड़ता है। तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने उदाहरण दिया कि अगर आपने अप्रैल 2015 में आपको ग्रीन कार्ड मिला है, तो अप्रैल 2020 में आप ग्रीन का आप अपना सिटीजनशिप अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। लेकिन यूएससीआईएस ने एक ग्रेस पीरियड दिया हुआ है, यानी कि आपके ग्रीन कार्ड के 5 साल होने के 90 दिन पहले आप एप्लीकेशन जो है या अर्जी जो है वो शुरुआत कर सकते हैं अर्जी देने की। तो जैसे अगर आपको अप्रैल 2015 में ग्रीन कार्ड मिला है, तो आप जनवरी के जो 2020 में अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। थैंक यू।
Great. So similarly, just like I told you that most people walk through the 5-year rule, and all of this applies under the 5-year rule. Now we have to talk about the 3-year rule, which is for a select group of people. And that 3-year rule requires two things. One, if you want to walk through this exclusive 3-year rule, one, you have to be married to a US citizen. And two, you have to be living with that US citizen. Excuse me, living with that US citizen through the time of your application and even all the way through your swearing in ceremony. So if you're going to go through the 3-year rule, married to a US citizen and still living. So if I give you an example, hi, my wife just got a job in Atlanta, Georgia, but I stayed in New York. The marriage is still fine, but we're not living together. So in which case, the 3-year rule wouldn't apply, and I would just have to apply under the 5-year rule. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Wilfred.
Yeah.
That's a very great detailed example.
Uh-huh.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया, कुछ लोग जो हैं उनको 5 साल वेट करने की जरूरत नहीं है, वो 3 साल में भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। लेकिन वो कौन लोग हैं? तो अगर आपने जिससे शादी की, अगर वो यूएस सिटीजन है, और अगर आप उनके साथ कम से कम 3 साल एक ही जगह पर एक ही घर में रहे हैं, तो फिर आप जो है 3 साल के बाद ग्रीन का सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। विल्फ्रेड ने एक उदाहरण दिया, अगर किसी का किसी की वाइफ है, वो यूएस सिटीजन है, लेकिन वो अटलांटा में रहती है, और हस्बैंड जो है वो न्यूयॉर्क में रहते हैं, तो वो 3 साल बाद, शादी के 3 साल बाद नहीं अप्लाई कर सकते, क्योंकि वो एक ही साथ एक ही घर में नहीं रहते। तो एक ही साथ एक ही घर में कम से कम 3 साल, शादी के बाद 3 साल रहने के बाद ही 3 साल में अप्लाई कर सकते हैं। अगर साथ में नहीं रहते एक ही घर में, एक ही स्टेट में, एक ही एड्रेस पर, तो फिर उनको 5 साल वेट करना पड़ेगा। थैंक यू।
Yeah, of course. And it wouldn't be immigration if I didn't have one more complication with this, right? But it's the same complication we talked under the 5-year rule. Under the 3-year rule, you get a 90-day grace. So meaning that you don't have to wait the full 3 years. You can apply 90 days before the 3 years, which is another way of saying 2 years and 9 months.
आपको पूरे 3 साल रुकने की जरूरत नहीं है। अगर आप साथ में रहते हैं, तो आप 2 साल और 9 महीने तक, 9 महीने के बाद भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं।
Okay. So now we get into something that seems sort of difficult, but it's not that difficult. It's the idea of continuous residence. So depending if you're using the 5-year rule or if you're using the 3-year rule, you are expected to continuously reside in the United States. Another way of thinking about it is over the last 5 years or over the last 3 years, did you primarily live in the United States? You're allowed to travel. You can travel. You can go to your country of origin. You can go on vacation. But the idea is that you always come back because this is home. Residents of the United States are expected to reside in the United States. So what happens if you take a trip that's longer than 6 months? Now you run into a little bit of a problem. It's a small problem. And that problem is that you have to now prove that you did not intend to abandon your residency. Yes, you took a trip longer than 6 months, but look, I always expected to come back. So how do you prove that? I had a lease. I had utility bills that I still paid. The majority of my family still live in the United States. I had a bank account. I was not going to abandon that bank account to go back to my country of origin. But these are the things that you're going to have to show when, if your trip lasts longer than 6 months.
Thank you, Wilfred. This happens quite frequently. A few years ago, we were trying to help a client apply for citizenship, and it happened that she had lived outside. She'd been living here for 15 years, but she never thought of applying for citizenship, but finally decided to apply. And then when she was doing her application, they realized that out of that 15 years, 1 year she was out of the United States. She was actually caring for a sick family member. And then they got an affidavit to prove that that she was there and she was caring for a sick family member. And then, as you said, she had bank account here, and she
Yep.
had majority of her family here.
Exactly. So, and all of that, why? Because think of it as it's an argument. The government is going to make the argument that, Mary, I think you abandoned. And you're going to say, no. I get it that it looks like it, but I didn't abandon. I always intended. I went to take care of my father. Unfortunately, my father passed away, and it just took longer than 6 months, but I always intended to come home. And here's proof that I always intended to come home. Does that make sense?
Yes. So जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने कहा कि काफी बार क्लाइंट्स पूछते हैं कि क्या हम 6 महीने से ज्यादा कंट्री के बाहर ट्रैवल कर सकते हैं। तो यूजुअली अगर आपको सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई करना है तो काफी बार यूएससीआईएस देखता है कि आप अमेरिका में ज्यादा टाइम रहे हैं और कंट्री के बाहर कम टाइम रहे हैं। तो 6 महीने ऐसे बताया गया है कि 6 महीने से ज्यादा नहीं रहना चाहिए। लेकिन अगर आपको कोई कारणवश 6 महीने से ज्यादा ट्रैवल करना पड़ा या कहीं रहना पड़ा, तो पेपर वर्क होता है जो आप कर सकते हैं। आपका क्यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के जो वकील हैं वो आपकी इसमें मदद कर सकते हैं। और जैसे कि बताया कि बैंक अकाउंट दे सकते हैं, बता सकते हैं कि आप ज्यादा टाइम यहाँ पे रहते हैं, आपके और भी यहाँ पे परिवार वाले हैं वो यहाँ पे रहते हैं। अगर आप किसी बीमार व्यक्ति की मदद करने के लिए गए हैं, कोई भी और कारणवश गए हैं, तो वो अपने वकील को जरूर बताएं और वो आपको बताएंगे कि आप क्या पेपर वर्क दे सकते हैं, तैयारी कर सकते हैं क्या पेपर वर्क की, जिसमें आपकी मदद हो जाए।
Right. Now, similarly, if you go over 1 year, so now you're outside the United States for over a year. Now things change. You still have to go through that what's known as the rebuttable presumption. In other words, show that, look, I always had the intention of coming back. But because you went over a year, you're deemed to have broken continuous residence. And in that case, you are no longer eligible to apply for citizenship until, if you're using the 5-year rule, 4 years and 1 day from the end of that trip. Which trip? The one that lasted longer than a year. And if you're using the 3-year rule, 2 years and 1 day from the end of that trip. Does that make sense?
Can you, is it possible for you to give an example?
So sure. So I go to Ecuador. I just happen to be from Ecuador, so I always use that example. So I go to Ecuador. I go there to take care of my sick father. My sick father, I don't expect to stay out very long. I thought that my father would get better. And regrettably, my father passes away. And just like here in the United States or in every other country in the world, when a parent passes away, there's estate considerations to consider. Like, what do we do with my family's home? What do we do with their accounts? All of those things have to be settled. So I remained in Ecuador, waiting to settle these matters. And suddenly, it turns out, while I was doing all this, I was out in Ecuador for over a year. So I still have to prove that I intended to return. So look, here's my bank account. While I was in Ecuador for a year, I still paid my lease. Of course, I'm going to pay my lease. That's all my stuff is in my home, that kind of thing. I still paid my lease. However, when I come back to the United States, I am no longer eligible to apply for citizenship. I have to wait until 4 years and 1 day from the end of that trip to be eligible again for citizenship under the 5-year rule. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
thank you, Wilfred.
Mhm.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने उदाहरण दिया, अगर कोई 1 साल से ज्यादा कंट्री के बाहर रहे हैं, कोई भी कारणवश, काफी बार हो जाता है कि लोग किसी बीमार व्यक्ति की मदद करने के लिए देश से बाहर जाते हैं, और अगर उनका निधन हो गया, जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया, अगर वो कोई उन्होंने इक्वाडोर जाने का उदाहरण दिया, तो अगर वहां गए किसी की मदद करने और उनका निधन हो गया, और बाद में आप उनकी पेपर या प्रॉपर्टी कार्रवाई उसमें चक्करों में फंस गए, और आप 1 साल से ज्यादा आपको देश के बाहर रहना पड़ा, तो फिर आप यूएससीआईएस को प्रूव कर सकते हैं कि आपका यहाँ पर लीज था, अपार्टमेंट था, और यहाँ पर आप आपका जो प्राइमरी स्थल है या घर है वो अमेरिका में है, वहां पर आप कंट्री के बाहर बस ट्रिप के लिए गए थे, आप वो सब कर सकते हैं, लेकिन फिर भी आपको और 4 साल वेट करना पड़ेगा सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई करने को।
Okay, great. So though that's what's known as continuous presence. And here's a more simpler concept that's still part of it: physical presence. The idea being that we need to count how many days you are physically in the United States on US soil over either 5 years or 3 years, depending on what you're applying under, right? So the idea being that if you're applying under the 5-year rule, you're expected to have spent at least 912 days in the United States. If you're applying under the 3-year rule, remember that's the rule where I have a US citizen spouse and we're still living together. That allows you to go through that special privileged 3-year door. Then you have to show that over the last 3 years, I've spent 547 days in the United States. In the United States. Now, if I can give you a quick example, what happens if today I do my numbers and it turns out that I have spent too much time abroad, I spent too much time in Ecuador, then the idea is stay here, because every day you wake up, the number changes, right? Every day you wake up, the number changes. So the idea is, what happens if I'm 7 days short? Then stay in the United States another 7 days, and now you can apply. In other words, don't travel.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया कि और एक चीज है, जो है कि आप यूएससीआईएस एक और चीज पे ध्यान देता है, वो है कि आप 5 साल में या 3 साल, जो भी कैटेगरी में आप सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई कर रहे हैं, उसमें आप कितने दिन अमेरिकन धरती पे थे। तो जैसे कहा, अगर 5 साल है तो कम से कम 912 दिन, और अगर 3 साल है तो 547 डेज जो है वो है, वो आपको कम से कम यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स में रहना होना चाहिए। तो ये अगर 5 साल और 3 साल जो है दिन गिनने में अगर आपको दिक्कत होती है, तो आप ये 912 और 547 ये दिन जो है हिसाब याद रखने में आपको आसानी पड़ती है, तो आप इसके हिसाब से भी अपने दिन आप देख सकते हैं कि आपको कब जल्दी से जल्दी आप कब अप्लाई कर सकते हैं।
Yep, thank you. So that's it. It's just a numbers game. This is just all numbers. That's all. So now let's go into something that is equally as important, but that could sometimes negatively impact people as they're applying for citizenship. Part of you applying for citizenship is that you must prove that you're a person of good moral character. So what is that? So good moral character, as some of your audience might already know, or might already think, when you think of good moral character, they think arrests. Yeah, that's a huge part of this. That's a huge part of this, arrests. And any arrest, any time that anyone has ever been arrested or detained, it is super important that they obtain what's known as a certificate of disposition for each arrest. What is a certificate of disposition? It's a document by the court that had authority over your case that tells myself as an immigration attorney how your case was resolved. It could be that you got accused of something that looks really bad, but it turns out that you pled guilty to something that doesn't really have a lot of consequence. The certificate of disposition is going to tell me that. So the moral of the story, the point of this is any arrests, any detentions could have negative immigration consequences. The only way to know for sure, and remember what I said earlier, if my job is done correctly, every step in this process is well illuminated and there are no surprises. Certificates of disposition help me ensure that I can tell your community as we go forward that there are no surprises, but we need one for every incident.
And Wilfred, how can one get this a certificate of disposition?
Excellent. Certificates of disposition are usually found in the courts that had authorization over your case. So let me give you an example. Because sometimes these, stupid incidents happen. I was with my friends. I was at a restaurant. A fight broke out. And as that fight broke out, the police just came in and arrested everybody. I had nothing to do with the fight. I just got arrested. But it happened in Queens. So now I have to go to the Queens County Court and get a certificate of disposition to show that either the case was dismissed or if the case led to something else. But ultimately, all cases eventually end. They either end with a dismissal, or they end with you having pled guilty to something, or they end with a trial where a judge says that you're guilty of something. Or the judge could also say that you're innocent of something, right? But the point is the certificate of disposition will tell. Now, here's the problem. Certificates of disposition are given by the court that had the authority. If it's here in Queens, Queens County Court. If it's in Brooklyn, Kings County Court. If it's in Staten Island, Richmond County Court, having to go all the way to Staten Island. The problem gets more like, yeah, I had a problem in Texas. Now we have to find the court in Texas that had jurisdiction to get the certificate of disposition. Does that answer your question?
Yes. तो गुड मॉरल कैरेक्टर या अच्छा चाल चरित्र होना भी बहुत एक चीज है जो यूएससीआईएस देखती है. तो ये चीज क्या होता है, तो काफी बार लोग बोलते हैं कि हम जेल गए थे या हम अरेस्ट हो गए थे कोई कारणवश, तो क्या हम सिटीजनशिप के लिए अप्लाई नहीं कर सकते? आप अप्लाई कर सकते हैं, लेकिन उसके लिए आपको एक सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिस्पोजिशन जो होता है, कानूनी दस्तावेज होता है. तो जब आप अरेस्ट होते हैं या जिस कोर्ट में आपका केस चला था, वो कोर्ट जो है ये पेपर देता है और ये आपको अपने इमिग्रेशन लॉयर को देना है और वो उसके साथ उसका इस्तेमाल करके आपके लिए अप्लाई कर सकते हैं. Wilfred, I had another question related to this. So would this involve even if someone had a DUI, like a driving under influence?
Yes, it would
Okay.
involve. And the reason why is this. Look, some people are going to say, oh, no, it's a simple DUI. But depending on what happened with it, I'll give you an example. A DUI, and there's a 3-year-old child in the back seat. That's going to look very bad. That could have, now it's not just a simple DUI. It's a DUI with endangerment of a child in the back seat. You know what I mean? So in other words, the certificate of disposition would allow us to make those determinations and help better inform your community about the potential consequences of moving forward with an application. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I also had another related
Yeah, of course.
question that comes up a lot of times. What if a parent had an ACS case or they were involved with child protective services?
Sure.
Does that impact? Yeah.
If the child was, yes, then that would impact too, particularly if there's because usually those cases involve the welfare of the child.
Yeah.
So we would want to see the disposition of those particular cases and how those cases were resolved. It could be that you had an ACS case and the court decided to dismiss everything. Great. Then that's what we need. What we need. And we'll look for the dismissal.
तो जैसे कुछ सवाल जो मैंने पूछे थे वो है, अगर किसी को DUI या टिकट मिली है शराब पी के गाड़ी चलाने के लिए, या अगर उनका ACS केस चल रहा है, तो क्या ये सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिस्पोजिशन इसके लिए जरूरी पड़ेगा? तो कोई भी कानूनी केस अगर आपके ऊपर हुआ है तो आपको ये सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिस्पोजिशन जो है जरूर लगेगा, और इसमें आपके जो लॉयर हैं वो आपको और इसके बारे में जरूर जानकारी दे सकते हैं.
Okay. So, however, those are not the only considerations. Contacts with law enforcement or arrests are huge. They're very, very big. But all the considerations when it comes to determining good moral character, and we're just going to hit down these very quickly because I think you and your audience will understand what this means. Child support. If you have a child who's under the age of 18 and not living with you, even if that child is living in Ecuador or living in some other country, you must show that you have taken economic responsibility for that child. Failure to do so may mean that you're not a person of sufficient moral character. Taxes. If you owe taxes, you're expected to do something about those taxes. Does that mean that you have to pay the tax down to zero? No, you don't have to pay down the tax to zero. But it should mean that I contacted the IRS and I got on a payment plan and I'm doing something about my taxes. That would be sufficient. The problem, what they're trying to avoid is, yeah, I owe taxes and I'm not going to do anything about them. Then no, that's going to look bad. Voting is terrible. Your audience should know lawful permanent residents cannot vote. And so voting looks bad, and that could be a big moral character issues. And then the last point here is that, yes, USCIS expects you to have filed taxes if you're supposed to file taxes. If you didn't work or didn't have sufficient income for that particular year, then you not filing taxes is not a problem.
तो कुछ चीजें हैं जो करने से काफी फायदा हो सकता है, वो है कि आप अपना, अगर आपको चाइल्ड सपोर्ट पे करना है, कोई बच्चा है, अगर कोई कोर्ट ने आपको बोला है कि आपको चाइल्ड सपोर्ट पे करना है, तो वक्त पे अपना चाइल्ड सपोर्ट पे करें, वक्त पे टैक्सेस पे करें, वोटिंग कभी ना करें, क्योंकि अगर आप यूएस सिटीजन है तो ही आप वोट कर सकते हैं, तो जरूर ध्यान में रखें इनमें से कोई भी चीजें ना करें। अगर आपको किसी से कोई भी इन सारी चीजों के बारे में कोई भी सवाल है, तो आप, जैसे मैंने कहा कि आप यूनी सिटीजनशिप नाउ के हॉटलाइन पे फोन कर सकते हैं, आप सैक्स में भी फोन कर सकते हैं। हर मंगलवार को हमारे पास लीगल इंफॉर्मेशन क्लिनिक होता है, सुबह 10 बजे से शाम को 5:30 बजे तक, और आपका कोई भी एकदम अपने केस से संबंधित कोई सवाल है, तो आप हमारे इमिग्रेशन अटर्नी से जरूर बात कर सकते हैं।
Okay. Sorry. Oh, so I'm sorry. I just messed up the slides here. Taxes. Okay. So the English language requirement. So part of this requirement is that you are expected to show basic knowledge of English and U.S. civics. U.S. civics basically means how the U.S. government works, what the branches of government do, how do they interact with each other, and a little bit about U.S. history. You will be given, traditionally, there are 100 already established questions with their accredited answers. You will have to study, traditionally, you will have to study all 100 of those questions. And on the date of your interview, which is also going to be the same date that they administer this exam, they will ask you 10 questions randomly. You need at least 6 out of 10 to have success. And then you're also going to be asked to read and write a simple sentence in English. And so that sentence could be something about that George Washington was the first president of the United States, and having to write down a phrase like that. That is the traditional English requirement. And on the next slide, we're going to get into exceptions to that requirement. But just so you know, this is the traditional and what's expected, but there are exceptions.
तो काफी बार लोग हमसे सवाल पूछते हैं कि इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज टेस्ट, जो सिटीजनशिप का टेस्ट होता है, इसमें क्या सवाल होते हैं। तो एक जो है थोड़ा बहुत जानकारी अमेरिकन हिस्ट्री और सिविक्स के बारे में सबको होनी चाहिए, ये यूएससीआईएस की उम्मीद होती है। तो जब आपका सिटीजनशिप इंटरव्यू होता है तो आपको एक उनकी बुकलेट आती है जिसमें 100 सवाल होते हैं। तो इंटरव्यू के दिन आपको 10 सवाल पूछे जाएंगे, उसमें से कम आपको 6 सवालों के सही जवाब देने हैं, और अंग्रेजी में या इंग्लिश में एक सेंटेंस या कोई भी एक लाइन जो है वो आपको लिखना भी पड़ेगा और पढ़ना भी पड़ेगा, और ये कोई भी आसान सा सेंटेंस हो सकता है या लाइन हो सकती है। जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने उदाहरण दिया कि आप लिख सकते हैं कि जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन जो है वो अमेरिका के पहले प्रेसिडेंट थे।
Okay. So let's get into these exceptions.
लेकिन कुछ जो एक्सेप्शंस या कोई कोई केस में लोगों को ये इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज टेस्ट या हिस्ट्री का जो टेस्ट है इससे छुट्टी मिल सकती है, तो उसके बारे में थोड़ा देखेंगे।
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So there are exceptions. There are exceptions. There absolutely are exceptions. So the way I view these exceptions is 50-20, 55-15. So what does this mean? 50 years of age, at least 50 years of age. If you want to think of that first column as age, and the second column, and this is going to be very important, second column as how long have you had lawful permanent resident status? Notice it's not how long have you been in the United States. It's how long you had lawful permanent resident status. So if you can say that you're at least 50 years old, and you've been a lawful permanent resident of the United States for 20 years, then you are exempt from the English language requirement. You will still be interviewed, you will still be tested, but it would be in a language of your choosing. I'm sorry, go ahead. You can translate that. It's before.
Thank you, Wilfred. This
Yeah.
is a question that comes up very, very often.
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of our community members, they have the legal permanent resident, requirement, but they are, apprehensive of taking because they're worried about the language test.
Mhm.
So, and I think this is very important information. So, जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने कहा कि काफी बार लोगों को लगता है कि मुझे इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज टेस्ट लेना है, लेकिन मुझे इतना कॉन्फिडेंस नहीं है, तो मैं क्या करूं? तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया कि अगर आपकी उम्र कम से कम आप 50 साल के हैं और आपके पास लीगल परमानेंट रेजिडेंट यानी ग्रीन कार्ड जो है वो 20 साल से ज्यादा सालों से 20 साल, कम से कम 20 साल तक है, तो आपको जो है वो इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज एग्जाम से छुट्टी मिल सकती है।
And similarly, so what happens? Okay, I'm 50 years of age, but I don't have 20 years of lawful permanent resident status, or I don't have a green card for 20 years. That's fine. There's a second opportunity, and that is 55-15, which reads the same way. Are you at least 55 years old with 15 years of residency? And if that's you, then you can also you're still going to be examined, you will still be interviewed, but it will be in the language of your choosing.
एक बहुत ही जरूरी चीज है, अगर आपको लग रहा है कि आप 20 साल नहीं है, लेकिन दूसरा जो चीज है वो है कि अगर आप 55 साल के हैं और आप कम से कम 15 साल तक आपके पास ग्रीन कार्ड रहा हो, तो भी आपको इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज एग्जाम जो है, वो लैंग्वेज का जो भाषा का जो एग्जाम है वो नहीं देना पड़ेगा। आपको इंटरव्यू आपका जरूर होगा, लेकिन वो इंटरव्यू जो है वो आपकी अपनी भाषा में होगी, वो अंग्रेजी में नहीं होगी।
Okay. And then the other bullet point I have there is 65-20. And already you're probably seeing a pattern on how to read this. 65 years of age with at least 20 years of lawful permanent resident status. And I know I'm saying this, I'm repeating this, but it's important. The 20 years does not mean, hi, I've been in the United States since 1979, but I just got my green card last year. Then what only counts is you having gotten your green card last year. You do not have the sufficient years of lawful permanent resident status. So what happens if you're 65-20? You can still go forward in the language of your choosing. However, here you have one added benefit, and that added benefit is that most people, when they take the exam, have to study 100 questions. Of that 100 questions, you need 6 out of 10 to have success. But if you're 65-20, you're going to get a shortened exam list, meaning that instead of 100 questions, you get to study 20. And out of those 20, you still need 6 out of 10 to have success.
ओके, तो दूसरा सबसे और एक बहुत ही जरूरी जानकारी वो है कि अगर आप 65 साल के हैं तो आपको, और आपके पास ग्रीन कार्ड को 20 साल के ऊपर हो गया है ग्रीन कार्ड को आपके, तो आपको और एक बेनिफिट है और एक फायदा है, वो ये है कि बाकी सबको अगर 100 सवाल पढ़ने पड़ेंगे तो आपको सिर्फ 20 सवाल पढ़ने पड़ेंगे, और वो 20 सवाल में से कम 6 सवालों का आपको सही उत्तर देना पड़ेगा।
Okay. So if I may, and I'm sorry, I hope this doesn't take too much time. I just wanted to highlight this with an example because it allows me to actually get into another area. So here in this example, I have the example of Victoria and Ellen, age 81, are twins born in El Salvador. They do not speak English and they have been permanent residents for 5 years. Victoria is not in good health. Unfortunately, Elena suffers from dementia and is unable to remember anything. Since they are 81 years old, are they eligible to apply for the language or medical exemption? We are going to discuss the medical exemption in a second, but I want you to understand from this example, given that they only got their lawful permanent resident status 5 years ago, and remember, previously it was 50-20 or 55-15, they have the age. They don't have sufficient time with lawful permanent resident status. So it does not look like that they're going to be able to qualify on their own because they, even though they've been here for a long time, they only got their lawful permanent resident status 5 years ago. So what do you do in a case like this? In a case like this, there's one final opportunity, and that is getting what's known as a medical exemption. Okay. I don't know if do you want to translate that, or should I just go into the medical exemption part?
I think we can go into the medical exemption.
Sure. So the medical exemption part is what's known as an N648. It's a medical certification for disability. This is a form that is filled out specifically by your doctor. And it should be filled out by the doctor that knows your medical history the best, because it's going to ask for a lot of detail, and detail is key. Detail is key. The doctors, there's questions are going to be asked as to how long the doctor has known the patient. What kind of methods did the doctor use to diagnose the patient? And what is the ultimate diagnosis? And this is the key part. What does that diagnosis have to do with the applicant's ability to learn English or understand the civics portion of the test? So if I can give an example, look, such and such patient suffering from depression. Okay, they're suffering from depression, and that's terrible, terrible, terrible. But if the doctor doesn't provide enough detail to show how it is that that depression is preventing that person from either learning English or from learning civics, then this medical exemption is going to be denied. The point here is the doctor has to be very, very, very detailed in showing how the person was diagnosed and how that diagnosis impairs the person's ability. Does that make sense?
Yes. Wilfred, I have another question. So in the previous example, we saw that there was the age factor. For the medical exemption, or is there an age factor in this? Does age play any role?
Age is a factor, but it's not a dispositive factor. In other words, no one's going to approve this because age, if we're being honest, age is not a disability. No. By itself, age is not a disability. You know what else is not a disability? And actually, you might find this interesting. Your audience might find this interesting. Illiteracy is not a disability. So there are a lot of people that will look for an N648 because I never learned to read or write. To which the government will say, well then, unless you show me that you suffer from a disability that will prevent you from learning to read and write, then you're just gonna have to learn. So it's age by itself? No. age coupled with other factors, like because of the age, my cognitive, my mental abilities have greatly diminished. Oh, and here are the ways, as me as a doctor, here are the ways in which I've diagnosed the declining cognitive ability of my patient. Now you're moving into a more positive direction. Does that make sense?
या डेफिनेटली तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड बता रहे हैं तो एक N648 करके फॉर्म होता है। तो कोई भी अगर मेडिकल या कोई भी आपकी शारीरिक सेहत के कारण जैसे किसी को अगर डिमेंशिया है और उनको चीजें याद नहीं रहती है, तो ये N648 फॉर्म जो है ये उनके अगर डॉक्टर भरेंगे, इसमें बहुत सारे सवाल होते हैं और आपका डॉक्टर इसमें जितना ज्यादा से ज्यादा आपकी बीमारी के बारे में और इस बीमारी के कारण आप एग्जाम नहीं दे सकते या टेस्ट नहीं दे सकते सिटीजनशिप का, इसके बारे में जितना ज्यादा से ज्यादा जानकारी लिखेंगे उतना ज्यादा आपके केस में आगे जाके बात हो सकती है, आपको अप्रूवल उतना ज्यादा से ज्यादा जल्दी मिल सकता है।
Okay. The key point I want to make here is, again, it's up to the doctor to be as specific as possible. So what I don't want a doctor to do is, oh, the patient suffers from dementia, and because they suffer from dementia, that they're not going to be able to, take the exam, because that's too generic. Show me specifically in what way is dementia manifesting itself in this patient, and it's such that the patient will not be able to take the naturalization exam. Detail is key. Detail is key.
तो जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया कि डिटेल यानी छोटी छोटी बातें आपकी बीमारी के संबंधित वो आपके डॉक्टर ने लिखा होना चाहिए। खाली लिखना कि पेशेंट को डिमेंशिया है इसीलिए पेशेंट परीक्षा नहीं दे सकते, इसमें कोई ये यूएससीआईएस या जो कोई ये ऐसा पेपर वर्क पसंद नहीं आएगा। वो चाहते हैं कि आप डिमेंशिया के कारण आपके साथ क्या हुआ कि आपको चीजें याद नहीं रहती, किस किस किस्म की चीजें याद नहीं रहती, क्या आपके स्पेसिफिक या छोटी छोटी जो बातें हैं वो पूरे आपके डॉक्टर को भरना पड़ेगा इसमें। थैंक यू विल्फ्रेड।
Sure, of course. And then finally, as we come to the end, we finally get to the oath of allegiance. The oath of allegiance is the understanding that the applicant understands the oath of allegiance, is willing to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. And there's some exceptions to this. So the exceptions to be, like, for example, if because of your culture, your religion, you are prohibited from ever bearing arms, that's fine. You can, that, as long as you can show that, look, I'm a member of this community of people who share this common belief on arms, that should not overcome the oath of allegiance. But generally speaking, you're expected to take the oath of allegiance, and this comes at the very end of the process.
तो एक शपथ ग्रहण या कसम खानी पड़ती है कि आप जो है कभी भी सिटीजन अगर यूएस के बने तो आप उसकी रक्षा करेंगे। तो काफी बार लोगों को, अगर आप कोई ऐसे धर्म को पालते हैं जिसमें आपका धर्म कहता है कि आपको कोई भी किस्म का आप जंग में नहीं लड़ सकते हैं, कोई भी किस्म की जो वॉर, जैसे उन्होंने कहा बंदूकें या ऐसी कोई भी चीजें हैं उसका इस्तेमाल नहीं कर सकते, तो वो आपको प्रूव करना पड़ेगा कि आप धार्मिक कारणों की वजह से ये चीजों में जो है हिस्सा नहीं ले सकते। और ये काफी बार सिटीजनशिप के एकदम अंतिम पेपर वर्क में आता है ये।
Okay. So should be coming towards the end now. We have to talk about fees because these are important too. So naturalization by itself carries along with it a total of $725 fee payable to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. However, there are fee waivers. And so there's roughly 3 ways to get a fee waiver. One is if you received a means-tested benefit. A means-tested benefit is something that where you would have to show, because of your lack of resources, you're eligible for Medicaid, food stamps, cash assistance. If you can show that and that you're currently receiving that benefit, you would be eligible for a fee waiver, in which case you wouldn't have to pay the $725. The other way is if you have income that's below 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. Now, for that, you'd have to know what the federal poverty guidelines are. But to give you an example, a family of four, a household of four, would have to show that they make less than $41,625. So just to give you an example of a household of four, they would have to make less than $41,625 to be able to get a fee waiver under the current federal poverty guidelines. And then the third is a documented financial hardship. But these are actually more difficult to get. But I can tell you what would rise to the level: in an unfortunate, unexpected death in the family that suddenly required a lot of money. Look, our family had money. We had this death. Burials, funerals cost a lot of money, and we were not expecting that kind of hit, right? Oh, and maybe there was a sickness before that also cost money. Those type of things you could use to show a documented financial hardship to get a fee waiver, so that the naturalization application or the citizenship application is then free.
तो सिटीजनशिप एप्लीकेशन जो है काफ़ी बार काफ़ी महंगा होता है। तो जैसे आप देख सकते हैं स्क्रीन पर जो है वो सिटीजनशिप एप्लीकेशन के लिए कितना पैसा जमा करना पड़ता है वो लिखा हुआ है। तो टोटल जो है $640 और $85, $725 जो है वो USCIS को भरना पड़ता है। लेकिन ये फी वेवर या इस फी में आपको कटौती मिल सकती है अगर आपको फूड स्टैम्प्स या मेडिकेड जो है अगर आपको मिलता है तो आपको ज़रूर इसमें कटौती मिल सकती है। दूसरी चीज़ है कि अगर आपका जो वेतन है या इनकम है वो फेडरल पॉवर्टी गाइडलाइन से कम 150 या 150% अगर नीचे है तो फिर आपको ये वेवर मिल सकता है। और एक चीज़ है कि अचानक डॉक्यूमेंटेड फाइनेंशियल हार्डशिप, यानी कि अगर अचानक आपकी आर्थिक परिस्थिति खराब हो गई। विल्फ्रेड ने बहुत अच्छा उदाहरण दिया, आपके परिवार में कोई बहुत बीमार पड़ गया या आपके परिवार में अचानक किसी का देहांत हो गया और उनके फ्यूनरल के लिए और बाकी चीज़ों के लिए बहुत पैसे लग गए, तो आप ये फी वेवर के लिए अप्लाई कर सकते हैं।
Okay. If I can move this forward. Okay. And so us at CUNY Citizenship Now, we'd be happy to assist you in all the services that we provide. And even if it's services that we do not provide, we will at least give you an intake, explain the process to you, and give you an informed referral. Currently, our offices are slowly but surely opening now that it looks like that we're going more and more into this post-COVID atmosphere. Our legal staff is available by phone or Zoom, and in some limited instances, although it's growing every week, we're opening new offices. We'll be able to start seeing people in person, and your community is more than welcome to contact us for I'm obligated to say this, for our free services. We will never charge you anything, and they can contact us at the numbers you see there: 646-664-9400. Or they can even send a text message if you don't want to talk to anyone. They'll assign you an appointment just the same at 929-334-3784.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. And I'm pleased to inform you that we are also a site for CUNY Citizenship Now. Every Tuesdays, we work with your team and through New York City Council member James F. Gennaro's office.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So जैसे विल्फ्रेड ने बताया, अगर आपको CUNY Citizenship Now को कांटेक्ट करना है तो उनका इंफॉर्मेशन नीचे है 646-664-9400। आप कॉल कर सकते हैं या टेक्स्ट भी कर सकते हैं 929-334-3784। और जैसे मैंने कहा कि सैक्स में भी ये CUNY Citizenship Now का फायदा उठा सकते हैं आप हर मंगलवार को सुबह 10 से शाम को 5:30 बजे के बीच में। और आपके पास अगर सैक्स का नंबर नहीं है तो वो है 718-321-7929। तो आप सैक्स में ज़रूर फ़ोन करें और आप दिव्या के बारे में पूछे, वो हमारे लीगल क्लिनिक की कोऑर्डिनेटर है। और आप दिव्या से बात करें और वो आपको आपकी मदद कर सकते हैं अपॉइंटमेंट CUNY Citizenship Now के अपॉइंटमेंट के लिए। So thank you very much. Thank you, Wilfred, for this very, very important and pertinent information.
Of course.
Wilfred का धन्यवाद। और एक और चीज जो Wilfred काफी बार कह चुके हैं, all CUNY Citizenship Now services are free. CUNY Citizenship Now के सारे जो services हैं वो मुफ्त हैं। We have Wilfred a few questions in the chat box that we want to take. तो अभी हम सवाल कुछ जो चैट बॉक्स में सवाल हैं उन सवालों का जवाब विल्फ्रेड देंगे. The first question here is, can ST6 category green card apply for citizenship after 3 years of green card? When do they qualify? Is this category need to provide any different information or documents, uh, information or document other than regular citizenship application?
The quick question to that is I'm embarrassed to say I'm not as familiar with the ST6 category as I should be, but I can find out that information and get back to you. And I can contact you specifically, Mary, on the ST6 category.
Hi, this is Shy with USCIS. How are you?
Hello.
Yes, that person would have to wait the 5 years instead of the 3 years.
थैंक यू सो मच. सो जैसे आपने सवाल देखा, अगर सवाल था ST6 के लिए कैटेगरी के लिए आपको कितने साल वेट करना पड़ेगा, तो आपको 5 साल वेट करना पड़ेगा अगर आपने ये सवाल पूछा है. तो अगर आपको इसके बारे में एकदम पुख्ता आंसर चाहिए, आप CUNY सिटीजनशिप नाउ के हॉटलाइन पर भी फोन कर सकते हैं. द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज, I have another question here. As of now, is it taking longer for people to receive, it's not related to citizenship, but as of now, is it taking longer for people to receive green card due to the pandemic?
It's from what we've seen, it's taking USCIS is sort of a little bit variable right now to receive green cards as a result of the pandemic. So, but there's a difference to be made in terms of the actual green card that you receive and the receipt notice that you receive. USCIS now is sending receipt notices, and those receipt notices will typically extend the validity of your expiring card or expired card for a certain period of time, usually a year, until such time that you get the physical card in the mail.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions that we can take? We still have a few minutes. You can either type it in the chat box or you can raise your hand and we can answer your question. Wilfred can answer your question. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. This is Sushmita.
Mhm.
I have a question regarding the naturalized citizens. So will they be able to own property back home? And if so, if they have to pay tax out of it?
If I understood your question correctly, once you become a U.S. citizen, can you still own property in your country of
Back
origin?
home. Yes.
And are you expected to pay taxes on the country on income generated from your property abroad?
Yes. Yes, correct.
So the answer is yes. Barring some sort of governmental rule against owning property in a particular country, generally speaking, you can continue to be a proud property owner in your country of origin. But as a U.S. citizen, it must be said, as a U.S. citizen, all income generated to a U.S. citizen, whether it be here or abroad, is counted as income for tax purposes.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very quickly, Wilfred, we have another question here in the chat box.
Mhm.
I have been a permanent resident in the United States for 24 years and lived with a US citizen for 12 years and also went to school here. Do I still need to apply for citizenship or do I have one automatically?
So the real question is, did the person, they were here for 24 years, they lived with repeat that part of it, they lived with whom?
Lived with a US citizen for 12 years and also went to school here. Do they still need to apply for citizenship or do they get one automatically?
So there's a few pieces missing there.
Okay.
One of the things I would like to know is, did you marry a U.S. citizen spouse? Given that they didn't mention it, I doubt that they did. And if they didn't marry their U.S. citizen spouse, then they cannot expect, think of marriage as having established a legal connection. If they never established a legal connection to their U.S. citizen significant other, in other words, they never became a spouse, it's unlikely that they will ever have gotten lawful permanent resident status from that relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes, hopefully it made sense. And like I said, if anybody has very case specific questions, you can reach out to the CUNY Citizenship Now hotline, or you can even call SACSS and we can help you get an appointment with the CUNY
Yep.
Citizenship Now attorney as well. Adiba is raising her hand. Adiba, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Adiba from SACSS. Thank you so much for a nice presentation.
Sure.
Sometime I get this question from my client. They're low-income family. They receive a lot of benefits like SNAP, cash assistance, rental assistance. Do they still can apply for citizenship after
Yes.
finishing 5 years of green card permanent residency?
Yes, they can apply for citizenship if they're receiving these public benefits, and the idea of them having received these public benefits would make them eligible for a fee waiver.
Fee waiver, okay.
Okay.
And if the income is low, do they need joint sponsor?
So I like the question, joint sponsor, because this is good. This is the idea is that these notions get confused a lot in the community. So for citizenship, because we're talking about citizenship, correct? We're talking about applying for naturalization or citizenship, just as what this presentation was about. You do not need a joint sponsor for applying for citizenship. I'm going to say that again. You do not need a joint sponsor for applying for citizenship. So which begs the question, hey, so then I've heard this thing about joint sponsor. Where did that come from? Where that comes from is that if you're petitioning for a family member to get a green card or lawful permanent resident status in the United States, or to be more technical, if you're petitioning for someone to obtain an immigrant visa to the United States, an immigrant visa leads to lawful permanent resident status, then the petitioner must show that the beneficiary, the person who's going to receive the green card is seen as a beneficiary. The beneficiary is unlikely to be a public charge in the United States. And then hence, then they will have to sponsor them. Sponsor them meaning, I'm going to show you that I have such income such that the beneficiary will not be a public charge in the United States. But that part of it happens in the beginning when the person is trying to get the green card. Once they have the green card, and they're applying for citizenship, there's no net need for a joint sponsor. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Adding to Adiba, what Adiba just asked is, Wilfred, we get a lot of times questions from our clients that they don't want to apply for any of these, SNAP or Medicaid because of, people are still scared about the public charge rule. So they think that it might affect. Can you provide some light on the public charge rule if you're aware of it?
So yeah, so the idea being that if you're going to sponsor somebody and you're receiving a public benefit, right, then the whole purpose of sponsoring someone and submitting what's known as an affidavit of support is to show that I have sufficient income here. Here I am raising my hand, having sufficient income to ensure, I'm just going to use my father as an example, to ensure that my father will not be a public charge in the United States. But if I'm receiving public benefit, then it looks like that's going to work against my argument. The idea being that I'm going to be able to support my father, but I'm receiving public benefits, which means it's going to perhaps make it unlikely that I'll be able to support my father. So in that instance, what you would try to do is get what's known as a joint sponsor. A joint sponsor is someone else. That person has to be either a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. They must be over the age of 18, and they must make their primary residence in the United States. And that person will then try to show that they have sufficient income in accordance to their household size, sufficient income such that they will present an affidavit of support for my father in this example. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have very quickly, we have a question in the chat box. How long does the whole citizenship process take, start to finish? Also, can I still get citizenship with an expired green card, or does my green card need to be active?
So right now we're advising people to renew your green card if it's already expired. If your green card will expire, let me take a step back. If your green card is already expired, one, or two, if your green card is going to expire within the next 6 months, then we're advising you to renew your green card. If you have more than 6 months of validity on your green card on the date that you apply, then there's no need to renew your green card. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, remember we talked about fee waivers? Fee waivers could also be used for the green card renewal. So in other words, you could get a fee waiver for the naturalization. And because let's say your green card's already expired or is on the verge of expiring, you could also use that fee waiver or that documentation that you're going to use for a fee waiver to also get a fee waiver for the green card renewal.
And how long does the whole citizenship process
Sure. I'm sorry.
start to finish?
You asked that. I completely dropped that question. I didn't mean to drop the question. My apologies. So this morning, I went and looked at USCIS processing times, particularly coming out of the Queens field office. And those processing times right now are between 13 and a half to 18 and a half months. However, I will say this, and I know Shakonia is on the line here, and she can perhaps speak more to this. Those are good guides. But there's some instances in which it goes much faster, depending on the underlying application. And there's other instances that, they fall within those guidelines. So you can expect something roughly in about a year. But I have seen instances recently where you might have someone who's applying for citizenship, has no issues, never married, no children, they basically zero complications, and suddenly they're already being called for an interview within 6 months. So there's right now, USCIS website would tell you 13 and a half to 18 and a half months, but this isn't the science. It can go a little quicker. It can go a little slower.
Anybody else have any more questions? I have one last question otherwise from a community member.
This is Shy again with USCIS, if I may.
Sure, thank you.
What we recommend is that when you file your application for naturalization or citizenship, as we're saying for the purpose of this discussion, we urge everyone to make sure that their documents are in order, because that is one of the issues that will prolong the processing of your case. When we call you in for your interview, there are a list of documents that we will ask you to bring in. Also, be prepared to give us the copies. We don't want your original documents, but if there is a disposition, if an arrest occurred, be prepared to submit a copy of that document. If there are divorce decrees, marriage certificates, and more importantly, translations, please be sure to have all of that documentation in order so that your case will be processed more efficiently. Because what will happen is, if your application is not, if all of the documentation is not submitted, we will have to issue another request for evidence. And that will undoubtedly prolong the case for quite some time. So that's just something to be mindful of.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Shai.
Yeah. And with Citizenship Now, one of the things that we do before we file is we make sure that everything is in good order. We try to make life as easy as possible for USCIS, such that things move as efficiently as possible, and try not to have the applicant be the cause for any potential delays.
I have a follow-up question on SNAP, that is food stamps. So does it mean anyone on SNAP cannot sponsor a family member by themselves? They do need a joint sponsor?
People who are on SNAP, by virtue of the fact that are on SNAP, it looks increasingly likely that they will need a joint sponsor given that, because what's happening, what essentially is happening is this. Remember, I keep using this term household size. Do you have sufficient income according to your household size such that you lessen the probability that my father, using my father as the example, my father will not be a public charge. So now my household size is 3. I have myself, my wife, and my daughter, and yet we're using SNAP. Now I'm going to add one more person to my household size, which would be my father, the person that I'm petitioning. If I'm already using SNAP and I have my father coming in, it looks increasingly unlikely that I will be able to support my father, given that we're all using SNAP. So there, the best course of action perhaps would be to search for a joint sponsor. I will also say this: those affidavits of support are contracts. They are contracts. The person signing the affidavit of support is contracting themselves to provide for the intending immigrant while they are lawful permanent residents in the United States, until such time that either death occurs, they accumulate 40 qualifying employment credits, or they become citizens themselves or naturalized.
Great. We have one last question from Divya. Divya, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So my clients have actually 2 questions. One is very similar to what Mary asked. They are afraid that if they apply for public assistance or benefits, that it will affect the process of their citizenship. Is that true?
Them applying for public benefits would affect the process of their citizenship? Not necessarily. Not necessarily for citizenship we're talking. As long as we're talking about citizenship, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would affect their process. But however, to speak more specifically on that matter, depending on what they're applying for, and depending on how long ago they got their green card, we speaking with an attorney with CUNY Citizenship Now could probably give you a more precise answer.
Okay, thank you so much. And second question is the 6 months complete when they land here or when they fly back?
6 months, you mean when they're the 6 months when they're outside the United States?
Yes.
So the 6 months is when you complete it. When you come back to the United States, so let's say you're out 5 months and you enter 1 day, you return 1 day shy of the 6 months, then you haven't raised what's known as the rebuttable presumption.
Okay. Thank you.
But if you're outside the, okay.
Thank you so much, Wilfred, and thank you to CUNY Citizenship Now and to Council Member James Gennaro for sponsoring this event. We hope it has been very useful and helpful for everyone. And you have the CUNY Citizenship Now information on your screen. And if you have any struggle or challenges, you can also call SACSS at 718-321-7929. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening. Thank you, Wilfred.
No, thank you guys. Thank you for having us or having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.